Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I know that normally I talk about the parasha or things that are particularly relevant in the cycle of the days, but today I'm going to draw from Daf Yomi. Daf Yomi is the cycle of reading from a page of Talmud each day. It takes you about 7 years to get through it. And some of it can seem incredibly beautiful and insightful, and other things can seem a little, shall we say, obscure, perhaps even esoteric. Indeed, Judaism has been criticized because the Talmud seems to dwell extensively on topics that seem of no import to any regular person. Well, we are irregular people, so let me take you through a topic from today's Daf Yomi and see whether we can't glean something from it that is perfectly relevant despite the antiquity of the topic. So, imagine that you are a regular run-of-the-mill Israelite out there hanging out with Moses, and you make a mistake. Let's keep the simplest possible version of a mistake. You accidentally eat something that wasn't kosher. A classic example would be part of the forbidden fat that was from the belly part of many animals that was not allowed to be eaten because it was only reserved for a sacrifice. Well, it can be a little tricky. Most people were doing their own slaughtering, and you might have made an oops when you were trying to trim it, and perhaps you learned it wrong or forgot it wrong that day, and then you suddenly realized later, oh my dear, I realize now that the thing I ate yesterday wasn't actually permitted to me. What do we do? Well, accidental transgressions like that have a very simple solution in the days of Moses. You bring a sacrifice. This is a classic sacrifice for an inadvertent error. No problem, and the usual the standard was a goat. Good? Everybody with me so far? Mm-hmm. Good. Now, I'm going to give you a promotion. Instead, imagine you are the king, and you accidentally do exactly the same thing. What is the result?
The same.
Answer number one would be, it's the same thing, right? Same mistake. You're a human being, and more importantly, in this case, you're Jewish, so, of course, one law for all. Thanks for playing. It is not. In fact, the king has to bring an entire cow. The king doesn't get off with a goat, he has to bring an entire cow. Now, why? Because he's king. And as king, he has a higher standard to repair the mistakes that he has made. Being the leader of the community means that, quite literally, his mistakes have a greater impact on the entire nation, and therefore his atonement has to be significantly increased as well for his accidental transgressions. So everybody has that basic rubric down. If you're a commoner, goat. If you're a king, cow. No problem. Good. Doesn't really matter to us. We don't have sacrifices, and we don't have kings. So let's keep digging. Well, the Talmud asks a lot of really cool questions, but the one that I want to focus on is it asks the question of, well, what counts as a king? Because you see, this question was posed by a rabbi known as Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Now, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi in English is usually translated as Rabbi Judah the Prince, and he lived in the 3rd century CE, long after the destruction of the Second Temple, and long after the end of even the illegitimate versions of Jewish sovereignty. But he's called HaNasi, and that ain't chump change, right? Is a Nasi a king for the status of this topic? Now, granted, there are no sacrifices, because there's no altar in Jerusalem for him to do this, but he wants to know, should he accidentally commit a transgression, would he be liable for the theoretical sacrifice of a commoner, or would he be liable for the theoretical sacrifice of a king? Because after all, he is the Nasi, he is the leader of the Jewish community in the land of Israel. And that is a public position. It's not quite the same as being a king, but in many places it is treated as king under Jewish law for other purposes. And so the question then becomes, well, how much of a king do you have to king in order to fall into the category of king with regards to the sacrifices? What does the Talmud do? It looks for precedent. It wants to look back and say, well, what do we know about other kings? Well, we have to look all the way back to the early days of Tanakh and the book of Samuel. We see Saul, we see David, we see Solomon, and they reign over the united kingdom of Israel. And then Solomon's son causes a civil war, and now we have two kingdoms, to the north and the south. And they say, does that mean that the king of the north and the king of the south were no longer enough of kings in order to fall under the category of having to bring the larger atonement sacrifice? No, because for both of them, they were king locally. They were the whole shebang within their own kingdom. The king of the north could not overrule the king of the south, much as he wanted to, and the king of the south could not overrule the king of the north. Each one of them was the king of their own domain. So, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, are you king of all of Israel as far as the Jews are concerned? Even if the Romans are actually the ones in charge, at least with regards to the Jews, is there anyone higher than you? Well, there was someone else still out there, known as the Reish Galuta. I know that's not a common term. The English isn't much better, the exilarch. The exilarch is the merging of the word exile and the word monarch. So the exilarch is the monarch of the exile. It is the Jewish leader for the diaspora. At that point was situated in Babylon. And the question then became, well, is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi and the exilarch, are they equal in the same way that the kings of the north and the south were in the pre-Babylonian days? Well, sorry to tell you, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, exilarch has superior status to you. Yes, you are Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. You will compile the Mishnah for us. You are the leader of the Jews in the land of Israel. But the true seat of Jewish power lies in Babylon during your generation. So for all of your greatness, both as a person as well as status within the community, you're technically not the top of the pyramid, and therefore you're a commoner like the rest of us. And should you make an inadvertent mistake, you are able to, theoretically, if we were to have an altar upon which you could offer such a sacrifice, you would give the same sacrifice as the rest of us. All right, hope I haven't lost everybody. Like I said, the Talmud can sometimes be a little obscure, and occasionally it can be off-putting to newcomers, but I'm doing my best to hopefully help you understand why this is important, because you can see that at the end of the day, the rabbis were not eager to promote people. They actually worked quite hard through this discussion, which takes a lot more time than what we just spent, to try and ensure that, in fact, there would not be a multiplication of leaders. This is not simply whoever is the big shot in the local community counts as the king, and therefore he has a higher status than everyone else. Instead, they seem to be reducing everyone. Now, on the one hand, that is generally in keeping with Judaism's democratic tendencies of the leveling of the community, especially post Second Temple destruction, where we try to keep everybody on an even level and connected to God through the same status. But more importantly, it is because of what that additional sacrifice meant. The king had a higher sacrifice price to pay. They had a bigger challenge to return, precisely because the king was king and no one was over the top of him except God. And that meant that a king was more prone to arrogance, a king was more prone to pride, a king was more prone to not wanting to admit their mistakes. And so the price had to be larger in order to twist the king's arm into recognizing that they needed to overcome that while doing teshuvah, while repenting for their mistake. They needed to pay a higher price to help humble themselves from the lofty status that they were in. But the rest of us were not so lofty. And thus, the amount of strain that it takes, the amount of reaching that we must do in order to be contrite, in order to turn from our ways, to do teshuvah, to repent for our mistakes, God set that bar very low. God made sure that it would always be attainable for each of us and that we would not be frightened from what was asked of us. The king, yes, a higher price, but for the rest of us, God is not asking much. Admit that what you did was wrong, show a sign of contrition, sacrifices in the ancient world, many other ways of doing it in the contemporary world, and turn from whatever it was that you did. Learn from that mistake and do better. By recognizing that all of us are on that level playing field, we have no kings today. We recognize that God waits for each one of us, just asking that we step over that tiny threshold in order to step back into the presence of God, clear from the mistakes that we have made. And as we are preparing ourselves for high holidays, that should be foremost in our minds. That it isn't a huge burden that we have. It isn't a long journey that we must undertake. It isn't some mountain that we have to climb to return to God. We are not kings burdened with the affairs of state and worse, our own egos, inflated to the size of a nation. We are just regular, simple people. We make mistakes, and God waits for us to acknowledge and return. That in mind, use the days between now and Rosh Hashanah wisely, and make those little steps, and they will carry you far. Shabbat Shalom.